Hello, and welcome to American Cannabis. I'm your host, Ellis Smith. Today we have an opportunity to participate in a live Q&A session with our guest, Bob Gunn, founder of Seinergy. Bob, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Ellis. It's my pleasure.
So Bob is an analyst rooted in the electric utility industry and founded Seinergy in 2012 to experiment with new market opportunities and challenge some outdated utility models. For me, this is exciting to have you on today to really explore this energy rebate that's happening in our industry. There's a big shift from going into LED lights as well as other technology, and if we can learn more about how this can really impact these new businesses coming in the sector, I think we can bring a lot of value to our industry. So Bob, tell me, how did you start Seinergy and what brought you into this space?
Well, like I said in the brief bio, I started in the electric utility space starting 10 years ago as an analyst. I was always kind of a quantitative analyst, decent with numbers. And I was in this department called Planning and Evaluation, and our role there was kind of scanning the horizon, understanding how people use energy, so understanding the demand side of the equation. So with that at hand, we identify opportunities to save money in the residential sector, industrial sector, et cetera. And I did branch off on my own 5 years ago, and during that time, cannabis was starting to become legal in my home state, Washington, and others as well. And of course, with my analyst hat on, I was doing these back-of-the-envelope calculations just about how much energy was consumed, but also with LEDs and other emerging technologies or new applications for existing technologies. The numbers, the conservation potential on the table was astounding to me. Huge amounts of savings, the equivalent of maybe insulating 1,000 homes per project seemed to be an apparent opportunity. So then I, of course, started asking utilities and asking different players in the market about, try to identify the barriers or understand why more wasn't happening. And I just kind of couldn't help but get involved myself to help push these energy savings opportunities forward, help utilities get quantifiable, transparent savings, and also help growers access this funding that help them make these big investments. So it's really through my lens as a planner from the utility space, but also being a free agent enough to start attending cannabis business meetings and things like that, and just asking questions. That was mid-2014. That's when I kind of put those two skills and interests together. Great.
Okay, let's nail down just some basic understandings for our audience here, just so we can kind of get a foundation here to build on our conversation. Let's kind of break down, what is an energy rebate? What does that mean?
Good question. Yeah, it's a pretty esoteric thing. Energy rebates are investments in energy efficiency that your electric utility makes in your projects. And it's not a new thing. Rebates have been very commonplace since the early 80s, and it's typically a grant where the electric utility will review your application. You propose saving X kilowatt hours of energy per year, and once you follow through with that, they will cut you a check that represents the lifetime value of those savings to the utility. Nationwide, utilities spend between $5 and $6 billion a year in funds that go to their customers' pockets to reduce energy needs. And I do want to clarify, this comes from the electric utility. Unlike solar or other things, it's not a tax credit from the state or the county or the federal government. It's your electric utility itself.
Okay. And how do you calculate those energy rebates?
Great question. It's two-pronged. One is based on the energy savings, and utilities typically boil it down into annual energy savings. So a typical project might save 100,000 kilowatt hours in a year. So that's the energy is kilowatt hours, but also the kilowatt reduction, the demand savings. Some utilities place a higher value than that on others. Sometimes it's peak related, sometimes not peak related. And so the energy savings are the first pass, and then there's often cost caps. I mean, they're only going to pay you up to a certain percentage of the project cost. And that will vary by utility, but you'll hear language like they'll pay 50% of the incremental cost or 70% of the incremental cost. So on the $1,000 light, even if the savings are phenomenal, they're not going to give you $2,500. They might give you up to, say, $800 or up to $900 on that $1,000 light. So energy savings with cost caps and other kind of feedback loops is how they determine it.
Well, that's great savings if you can generate that kind of a rebate out of it. That's great. Does the fact that cannabis...
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, the rebates, I just want to say, yeah, it's an enormous opportunity. In some states, we are seeing well above 50% of the project cost paid back. Other times it's lower, like 15 to 20%. But still, we know these are major capital investments. So even, every dollar counts when you're a cannabis company raising funds. And this is I look at this as a great opportunity to both partner with the utility and solve some of the financing headaches that the industry is facing. Normally, we can expect 40 to 60% of the project cost reimbursed from the utility, and that's a major generalization. We've seen as high as 85% from some kind of extraordinary utility offers, and many places are more in the 15 to 20% range. But yeah, these are big chunks of money coming back from your utility in the form of a cash grant.
Wow. That definitely can help our industry tremendously as we're looking to make this shift over into this new technology. And these fixtures are not cheap as we're looking to replace them compared to our traditional lighting. And so this is great. So Seinergy is now the leading energy efficiency firm focused on helping cannabis growers reduce their electric consumption. To date, how many grow facilities have you helped, and which states offer the best rebates?
I have consulted with a lot, or I've had a lot of inquiries, but I think we've completed 38 applications with utilities or with growers and their utilities. And those are mostly in the adult use states, mostly Colorado, Washington, and Oregon. I am Washington-based, so I have a lot more in the Oregon and Washington area. We have also, we fielded inquiries from everywhere. I don't want to say all 50 states, but I think probably 20 states. We even did some projects in Maine before adult use was legal under the medical programs. But yeah, rebates are available pretty widely. Some of the best rebates out there are in Washington and Oregon and some parts of Colorado. National Grid in Massachusetts and Rhode Island also has great rebates, and Efficiency Maine stands out in my mind as both an excellent group to work with, and they have really generous incentive offers.
What are you seeing in the California market? Personally, I've got quite a few projects going on out there. We know they're paying probably one of the highest premiums per kilowatt hour in that market. What kind of options do you have for us in that market? I know I personally will need that help, and you and I have already spoken about that. But for some audience members calling from California, where do you see you can help us in that market?
Sure. California has, like most states, California has about 60 utilities, but there's a few big ones that will, the 80-20 rule applies here. In Northern California, we have PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, and they will pay for, incentives for LEDs only. Despite the high kilowatt-hour rates that customers pay to consume energy, the rebates are good, but they're not as good as they are in Maine or Seattle, for example. But we can expect for an LED project probably somewhere between 15 and 25% of the project cost to be paid for. Or in other words, depending on if the light is a veg or a flower light, anywhere between $200 to $400 per light. And there's a lot of caveats and what ifs associated with that statement. But so that's PG&E in most of Northern California. And I'll come back to Sacramento in a second. Southern California Edison is running a similar program with it, so they're offering incentives for LED only, and in the same rate per kilowatt hour and kilowatt reduced. For Los Angeles, Water and Power, LADWP, I think the jury's still out on what technologies they're incenting, and same thing for San Diego. The other technology besides LED that some utilities will incent on are commonly ceramic metal halide or light-emitting ceramic. That's synonymous. LECs we'll hear. Some utilities will pay for those. And plasma and induction are also eligible. However, I haven't seen them so much in commercial scale as we have with LECs. Now I'll jump back up quickly in California up to Sacramento, where there's a lot of activity happening there. Sacramento Municipal Utility District, SMUD, they're very forward-thinking and open to hearing your case. So I've spoken with them going back probably 9 months or so. They will accept applications for other non-LED projects like ceramic metal halide, and they will look at both the direct energy reductions from the lights as well as indirect effects. For example, these lights will require less air conditioning, so there's a beneficial indirect effect. They'll look at the whole picture and consider those.
Okay. Can you explain to me and the audience, what your 3 main offerings are, your services, your products that you're offering for our industry, and how that can assist, all these audience members and people in our industry as a whole?
Sure. The first thing we offer for every project we work on is to do the rebate fulfillment. These applications are highly customized. It's a customized grant writing process that requires some level of understanding utility speak. And then the project management associated with that. So it's the application, the paperwork, and the coordinating inspections, all the way through the follow-up, post-inspections, and remitting payments from the utility. We'll do that rebate fulfillment for anybody, anywhere. In some markets, I won't go into it too much, we will lease, we have the ability to lease the lights, the lighting equipment to the growers using private capital, where we kind of, I pulled a card from the utility playbook where utilities generally offer incentives or financing in traditional markets. They'll offer incentives or financing. So we've played with some numbers to say that we could take the incentives that we can generate from the utility and bring that to the financing table, partner that with private capital, so that growers won't have to come up with that cash up front, and we can do a 3-year capital lease for those. So that's a nice way to get premium equipment for way less, almost nothing out of pocket. And then the third thing, which is kind of in beta phase, is rebate financing, where often you'll have a receivable on the table from the utility, and it is a contract, and it's something I'm familiar with, and we're comfortable lending against that receivable, knowing that it might be 3 months, 6 months out before the utility actually cuts that check. Based on the time frames of these construction build-outs. But that's something that we will offer as well. Since we're involved in the process, we can lend against that.
Okay. How could energy-efficient vendors benefit from working with Seinergy?
Well, we will help energy efficiency vendors we'll help their customers access the rebates, which is, it's a sales tool for them. Our skill set and our services. We'll offer free estimates for anyone. They can bring us a zip code, and we can tell you quickly who the utility is and what we know about them. For example, if you're in California, we'll say, oh, that's in Sacramento, any technology will be available, or no, that's in San Francisco, so it's LEDs only, and you can tell the customer to expect X%. So we get a lot of inquiries on an ongoing basis from lighting vendors or consultants or investors who are speccing a project and want to know what's available in that area. So free estimates are available for anyone. No strings attached there. We'll just tell you, if you're in Chicago, okay, here's the utility, here's what we know. If we need to do more research, we'll go and do that research, call the utilities, figure out what is available. And it's a long conversation to figure that out. That might be a different question, but there's that piece of it. And then, of course, for lighting vendor, often they'll bring us a project with a customer. They say they're interested, they want to buy it, but can you, see if we can do that, the 3-year financing lease package for them, and we'll execute those and help that vendor sell those lights.
Is it just lights that have the ability to get rebates, or are there other technologies that are eligible for rebates?
Through us, it's just lights, but it's definitely worth noting that HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, there's a lot of opportunities for rebates there as well. You know, if you put in variable speed fans or economizers that use outside air, that bring in outside air, or use a chiller instead of other compressors. Yeah, HVAC, there's definitely opportunity. Our company does not specialize in that. You really need mechanical engineers, and we don't have, that's not our specialty, so we try to stay in our swim lane of doing lighting and financing. But HVAC is the bigger one that you'll see. Other opportunities like insulation or windows are not quite as large of a rebate opportunity in this application because energy codes will require, you know, pretty decent levels of those already. But it's worth noting, we've been talking about LED lighting for grows. The rest of the facility is also eligible for standard commercial lighting, whether it's bathrooms and occupancy sensors or outside security lights or common areas that what we call general illumination. There's great incentives for general illumination that any local electrician should be well aware of.
Okay. I got a question coming in that kind of relates to our topic we're on right now. If you don't mind, I want to go to this real quick. As we see some new states coming on, this particular one is out of Arkansas, and they're asking, will rebates become greater in Arkansas as the medical marijuana and hemp programs age and progress? And I guess just showing how we have some of these new states, you know, Colorado, Washington, Oregon really being progressive, and California coming online. How do you see these other new states that don't have cannabis yet, but they will, and they need to understand the rebate aspect of this?
Well, I think, you know, I've already spoken with Seinergy, Arkansas. They're one of the major investor-owned utilities, and sure enough, we had a good conversation. They will offer rebates, and most utilities will. Part of the question is how to figure out who will offer them, because I mean, if you called Seinergy, Arkansas, or Seinergy is the utility in Arkansas, they operate in multiple states, and say, do you have cannabis incentives? The answer is going to be no. They don't have cannabis incentives, just like any program wouldn't have a special program for a microbrewery. They might have commercial incentives or general commercial lighting or commercial HVAC. But what we need to do when we talk to a utility is ask them, so here's the free advice to anyone, is ask the utilities about custom commercial incentives, not about lighting incentives, because we're not really talking about lighting, we're talking about an industrial process. So either custom commercial or custom industrial or industrial process. That's the language that the utilities can relate to, because they'll say, oh, I see. It has to go through this other channel, not through our general lighting programs. So I don't know that I can answer if rebates will be getting better or worse. I think the challenge is uncovering or finding the right person at that utility who can intake our our grant application and find the right bucket for it. And usually it's something like a custom commercial or custom light industrial. And you mentioned medical. A lot of states, 29 states having some access to medical or adult use. I would say that incentives are available in almost all 29 of those states. Again, it's just positioning our application the right way.
Okay. I have a question that's come in, I think, relating back to your grow lamp leasing offering. And they want to know, who is offering the lease, and is it a capital lease? Is anyone offering subscriptions?
Well, we offer a capital lease, which is accounting speak for, it's a 3-year lease to own with a $1 buyout. And a subscription lease, more like an operating lease where there's no fixed buyout price. It would say something like fair market value. I don't know anyone who's offering that. One theme that is pretty popular in the commercial lighting world is lighting as a service, and I've heard some murmurings of folks offering that. I haven't yet evaluated an actual project that's been completed, but those are really interesting and intriguing, where a company can come in and do the full build out for lighting in this case, and they will price the lease based on the energy savings. So let's say you're going to save $10,000 a month. How about we just charge you $8,000? So you're $2,000 ahead, and you might sign up for an 8-year or 10-year, generally a longer-term contract. That's a pretty common structure in other markets, like universities or campuses or larger buildings. But I'd love to see that really executed in cannabis. So that would be more of a subscription model based on the energy savings. Hope that answers the question.
Okay. Yeah. Are energy rebates higher for non-cannabis indoor farming projects?
No. Well, yes and no. They shouldn't be any higher. They should be treated the same. And again, when I talk to a utility, they don't understand. I mean, from the outside, there's no reason that a utility would really understand cannabis. But what we do when we apply for the applications or make these applications is we have to explain to them in some painstaking detail what's happening in these facilities. And we know that we have a vegetative process, which is generally 18 hours a day, and a flowering or bloom cycle, which is generally 12 hours a day. So those hours of operation really matter a lot in the energy efficiency world, because the longer the hours, the greater the kilowatt hours saved, given that we're dropping, say, a 1,000-watt light down to a 700-watt light. So if it's operating 18 hours a day, it will save more energy in that year than a similar setup that's only operating 12 hours a day. So to the extent that other indoor horticulture, like a leafy green manufacturer, might be operating 24 hours a day or even 18 hours a day but 365 days a year, yes, that would get more savings or comparable savings to the veg light in our industry. But in general, no, the incentives should not be sector specific. The incentives offered from the utility are based on just the energy savings, on a per kilowatt hour saved basis.
Okay. You kind of explained your service offerings and the products that you have and what Seinergy is. Can you just walk me through a process if you were to be engaged by, say, a large grower, and you're brought in from the initial inception of the idea, and how would this process look? Where would you lend assistance through the whole process, and where and when would the rebate come and get paid back, and how would just the process work?
Great question. So the process works with understanding what's available from rebates. And I will say to any utilities listening that incentives, I use the term incentives and rebates interchangeably, by the way. I will say they really help move the needle. And some customers will come to us and say, I'm interested in buying these lights, but such and such utility only offers for LEDs, so let's talk about LEDs. Or they'll say, I'm only going to, having those incentives available for LEDs only might mean they can access financing, so that they're going to choose that instead of HPS, whereas other utilities will offer ceramic metal halide or LEDs, so it doesn't narrow their options as much. But anyways, we'll talk about what's available and if they need financing or not. But first, the application process starts with itemizing the facility in terms of the rooms. We might have 1 bedroom and 4 flower rooms. We'll document the square feet of canopy per room, so not the gross room space, but how many square feet of plants will we have. So we remove aisleways and things like that. From that, and then we'll overlay how many watts are going to be installed in that room. We'll also infer how many baseline watts or how much wattage would have been installed in an inefficient case. We roll all that up, multiply that times the hours of use. So then we have an estimate of kilowatt hours saved. At that point, I can estimate pretty accurately what they're looking at in terms of energy savings, so that it can help them decide to move forward or not with the application. But if I zoom out for a minute, once we kind of figure all that out, we submit the application to the utility. They review it, and they will come out and inspect the facility. Even if it's a bare bones, empty warehouse, pre-build out, or a plot of dirt, they're likely still going to come out and review the plans. And then they will hopefully approve it within a few weeks. I'll say 4 to 6 weeks is a typical turnaround time from when we submit to the utility to get them to approve it. And that approval is a contract from them saying that the customer is going to sign. And it says, when you install these lights, as you have described, we'll give you a check for this much money. So then they have a notice to proceed, an authorization to buy equipment. The customer will buy and install that equipment and then ask for the post-inspection. Utilities will come out and count every light, make sure it, if you said there's 25 veg lights, they want to make sure there's exactly 25. If things move around, it might affect the rebate. So they're pretty diligent about making sure everything is just as it should be. And at that point, we get the thumbs up. They may need to do some post-metering or may not. And what that means is for larger jobs, some utilities say for incentives over $100,000, they may need to throw some light loggers on there to verify the hours of operation using their own equipment. But you shouldn't be too intimidated by that. It's typically 2 weeks of hours of operation verification. And then they give the green light to accounts payable to write a check. So once they're installed, within a few weeks, some utilities are faster than others, but within 3 to 6 weeks post-install, that's when you have a check from the utility for the grant amount.
Okay. I wanted to repeat, someone was asking what was the name of the company that provides the lease, and I just wanted to put that out there, that it's Seinergy, S-E-I, make sure I'm spelling this correctly, sorry, can't find my notes here, S-E-I-N-E-R-G-Y, so that'd be Seinergy on the rebates.
Correct.
I have another question for you, Bob. What kind of requirements do you have for the fixtures you are financing? Is there warranties, a UL listing? What are the requirements behind these? And I think you kind of touched on that about really CMHs and LEDs, but what other requirements are they really requiring behind those fixtures?
Mm-hmm. Well, for leasing, I will say our leasing requirements and the utility incentive requirements are kind of one and the same. And that is a UL specification, UL certification. So UL is both a certifying, a standards body, or they say here there's a standard for luminaires. It's called UL 1598. If you want to look it up in your spare time. So these fixtures have to be tested to that UL certification, and UL is also a certifying body that will do that, but also ETL, or Intertech is the company, but they might have an ETL stamp or a UL stamp. So it's important that it has that. Utilities are going to require that anyways, and also if you're a commercial operation, your building inspector is going to require that. So, there's cheaper products on the market that don't have those certifications, or they're just too new to the market to have it. But I'd recommend anyone get a product that does have that, so that you're compliant with your inspector and you're eligible for rebates. So that's the first thing. I should say up in Canada, CSA is another, they might have that CSA sticker instead of the UL or the ETL sticker. That is typically qualifying as well. And the second thing is a warranty. Our leases through our company, through Seinergy, are 3-year leases, so we do require a 3-year warranty. And I think every utility I've looked at requires at least a 3-year warranty. Some of them are 5-year warranties. But we require at least a 3-year warranty because if something goes bad in the meantime, we want to make sure at least the manufacturer will stand behind it during the lease period. Those are the two basic things. And yeah, that's the same for utility programs and for our leasing program.
Okay. I have a question here. Since cannabis is not federally approved and banks are not participating, how are you financing these light orders? I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, but if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Good question. Private financing is the answer. Institutional lenders that we've spoken with are intrigued but not willing to go there. So all of the capital behind these projects are privately funded.
Okay. I have a question here that I'm not going to really give a direct answer for, but I want to at least address this. This person is asking, what technology produces the best yields and the highest quality of product? And I think that's a hard question to answer because all the technology out there is pretty good. 90% of it is pretty good in our eyes. Some of it is not so good. And I think it's just a matter of the skill set of the person utilizing the technology, not just the technology itself. There also is a human component that has to operate under those conditions and need to have the skill set to really manage the expectation behind that technology. And so it's really hard to kind of say what's best in class, what is the worst in class. go out and do a lot of R&D on your own and understand, what information you can get from the web and from your peers. But it's hard to say there is one best in class for LED or CMH.
I agree. Thank you for taking that one.
Yes.
It depends, right?
It really does. And so I think that's a hard question to really pinpoint and ask. Okay. Let's see what kind of questions we have here. What do growers and investors need to know before buying lights? What are some good guidance you can kind of help understand so that we make the best decision?
Well, the grower is, I think, the ultimate decision maker, and oftentimes, jumping to LED is going to change a lot of other things: the nutrient cycle, the watering cycle, because those are kind of related, CO2 in the room, things like that. So growers have to be on, the head grower, whoever that is, has to be on board. You mentioned the investor, so I often kind of deal with the CFO or the investor person on the growers team, and with them we can talk numbers and ROI. And for them, I like to talk. I can talk all day long about the cost effectiveness of LEDs versus high pressure sodium, and the cost effectiveness is a complete slam dunk. But of course, if we don't have the growers buy-in, it's almost a non-starter. But I think what people should know going into it is to really appreciate how much energy and power you're going to save. On your utility bills, you have two major components. It's the kilowatt hours consumed and also the peak demand. And peak demand can sometimes be 30 to 50% of your power bill. I think many folks fail to kind of realize how big those impacts and those savings are. So looking at that over the course of the life of this asset, which is, these LEDs, they say will last 100,000 hours. I don't know, 100,000 hours from now, the technology will be 3 generations ahead. But even if we look out 5 or 8 years, I think the savings on the table are really impressive, and they should be not ignored. LEDs are expensive. Ceramic metal halides are more expensive, but if our investment time frame is greater than a year or two, then the economics make it a slam dunk. But then there's, like I said, I can't overlook the fact that if the growers aren't willing to try it, then it's kind of a non-starter.
Sure. Just to add to that, as a grower and I work with investors, we're constantly being bombarded about what is the newest, greatest technology out there, and we're constantly doing R&D and research, working with our peers to understand what is the best technology, where we're seeing the best yields. And there's a handful of them in the top tier, and they're all giving each other a good run for their money. And I think all of these LED manufacturers are great salesmen. That's their job. But go get your hands on these things. Do your own personal research. Speak to people that have had their hands on them and use them, and really understand what's going to be the best fit for your operation and also your budget. And then also see how these rebates and Bob's organization can help you out to get operational and save some of that capital expense that it can be very hefty with this type of technology. And so I would just really encourage, do your homework. Don't just listen to the sales pitch of the manufacturers. That's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. Really get your hands on with people that have been using it and get good feedback from them. And I think that would bring you really good value behind that. So I've got another question for you, Bob. Are there current groups that perform energy management buying for retail electricity on cannabis or hemp farms?
I think there are in deregulated markets in the East, maybe like in Pennsylvania comes to mind, in Illinois, where you can choose your retail utility provider. There are groups that do that, and that's a specialization that's outside of my company. In most of the West Coast, where we have just straight up monopolies, your utility is who it is, and you don't get a choice. I don't think there's much options there. But the question was, are there groups that do that? Yes, there are. Email me offline. The name's escaping me, but there's someone who I has been at a lot of conferences lecturing on this, and they can help you figure that out.
Do you see the ability of like a co-op coming in here, a utility co-op, farming co-op, something like that, that could kind of come in and play a role somehow?
As a starting your own utility, maybe? Is that the question?
Something just, there might be a possibility for a co-op to be born, for utility buying, similar to other farming co-ops is the question.
Man, that's a different regulatory question in the utility space. I do think I've heard some murmurings. I'll just point to Pennsylvania for a second, of the 12 licensees there saying, hey, we each are going to have a 5 megawatt load. So, in loose numbers, that's 60 to 80 megawatts. That's some real buying power. We should be able to get our own rate and negotiate with the utility to, maybe structure our hours of use in a way that benefits them for their peaks. Or, you'll have some real bargaining power just because we as an industry are going to use so much. But setting up an actual utility is a different ball of wax that's above my pay grade.
Sure. Here's another question. Can fixtures be leased only by Seinergy for a time frame?
Let's see. Through our program, yes. We're kind of a one-trick pony at this point, and our time frame is 3 years. Yeah, we could do shorter, of course. I will say that the reason it's 3 years is because even at inexpensive rates like we have in Washington and Oregon, even at those cheap rates, so your paybacks are longer because your energy savings is smaller. At a 3-year time frame, the energy savings, the amount you save on your bills per month, is greater than your lease payments when it's at 3 years. If it's at 2 years, then the economics kind of flip. So that's why we're at 3 years. We could go shorter. We wouldn't go longer. There will be other leasing companies out there that will, and I'm trying to find some other partners to give referrals to because we're not a one-size-fits-all. But there's other growers' needs for stretching out payments over a longer period of time. Or someone asked about the subscription service, maybe the ability to swap out fixtures after 18 months if they fear committing to a certain technology that might change. Hope that answers that.
I like that flexibility because as we're seeing the LED technology specifically, it's like cell phone technology. It is rapidly changing year after year exponentially, and it's hard to keep up with it. And so that's great to hear that you can have that flexibility with the way you were kind of leasing these things. And so I think that just offers a lot of value to your services. We're trying to incorporate
that. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Well, I'll add one more thing.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I have seen some LED companies do some pretty innovative things where they're making like the circuit boards or the diodes interchangeable, so that if one burns out, they can ship you new diodes. So you don't have to dismantle your racking system, for example. But also, if they come out with a new processing chip in a year or two, you can upgrade for a nominal fee. You can upgrade and have the latest and greatest. So there's some pretty cool plug-and-play activity happening in the hardware space. And I don't promote any particular brand. I won't even say who it is right now. But that's a fear of coming into this new technology as well. And I think some companies are getting ahead of that fear and addressing it proactively.
Okay. Do utilities give rebates for leased fixtures only?
Oh, no, absolutely not. In fact, that's the utilities will give, they will, if it's a lease, one thing utilities often want to know and ask me a lot of questions about is how long the lease is for, because they're making an investment that this equipment will be installed long term. And typically for them, they want to know it's going to be there for at least 5 years. So if it were a short-term lease, like if you were just straight up renting lights, like you might rent other commercial equipment, and there's no guarantee it'll be there in 12 months, then the utility might not even want to pay the rebate. So they want to know that it's there for good and it's there to stay. The leasing has nothing to do with the rebate eligibility. Like I said, if anything, it raises, well, I don't want to say raises questions because we've been successful because we're an open book with the utilities, but No, purchase projects are absolutely eligible.
Perfect. Do rebates incentives increase with the use of solar or hydropower added into the system?
No, rebates and power supply are kind of they're not related, I think is the easiest answer. If a utility, if a grower had, if they were net zero, if they had enough solar to offset their whole load, it might negatively affect their rebate eligibility. Another way of saying is they have to consume the electricity from that utility. If they were to switch off of it, whether it be solar or a gas generator, then the utility's not going to give an electricity energy efficiency incentive if you're no longer using their electricity. But otherwise, for most applications, except for an extreme, we have a major solar farm, your supply of power won't affect the rebate eligibility.
Okay. Are there any gold standards for energy efficiency that are laid out for cannabis farming now?
There are not. There are not any gold standards. I will say data is scarce in this industry, and there are some groups. A previous webinar you had, Alice, was with John Morris of the Resource Innovation Institute. I know they're coming out with this thing called the Power Score, where they're going to help growers, allow growers to submit some energy data and some information about their facility and the lighting technologies and things like that. And they're alongside the energy consumption, so that we can hopefully start to collect some really good, statistically significant data. And from there, standards bodies will be able to hopefully give something that growers can use to differentiate, the gold standard energy efficient cannabis versus just standard practice. But there are, so from an energy standpoint, I haven't seen anything else that's really has tons of market traction. I might stick my foot in my mouth. but there's nothing in mass that's out there yet.
Okay. I'm going to help answer this question here. It's a kind of a long one here, and I can help answer this as well as your input. What is your opinion on utilities offering incentives for LED only when LED may or may not be ready for all types of plant cycles, specifically flowering rooms? Seems that some utilities may not be knowledgeable in the grow market and could be directing growers to specific technologies that may not be applicable. And I think I'd like to just kind of take a stab at that real quick, where once again, this industry has a very heavy carbon footprint. Our industry and these power grids are taking a lot of use from our industry, and so these guys are looking to get creative to figure out how we can reduce that impact on the grid. And these solutions they're offering, they might not be what most traditional growers want to use, but I think through R&D and understanding that the technology is there now currently, it's just we have to buy into it and accept it and take that leg from one side of the fence to the other and adopt it and move on. And as you'll see, there's significant impacts you can have on your bottom line when you do make the switch from LED. And it's hard to justify replacing a one-to-one replacement, 1,000 watt to 600 watt or 700 watts, and still get the same production per square foot. And I think we have to adjust from our growing styles that we've been traditionally doing in the past, look at new ways of growing the plant with this technology, because it can be done. And so I think the power companies are doing a favor in recommending LED and CMHs as an alternative because it is proven. And I think it's just a matter of opinion of some people not wanting to buy into that technology yet. And so I think just over time, proof is in the pudding. Your peers will start to explain to you more and more and show the data. I think it just takes time to adopt the technology. So I think the power utilities are doing their job to try to reduce the impact of our industry. And so that's just what their objective is.
Yeah, I'd like to offer my sentiment as well. I think the question was about utilities offering LED only incentives, and I believe, because I have a handful of clients who have made major investments in LEDs and they love it for veg and flower. So I mean, the jury's out for a lot of folks about if they could flower under LEDs or not, and I don't even try to partake in that conversation too much. But I don't like when utilities jump ahead and say we'll only incent on LEDs, leaving people who kind of wanted to go from maybe an HPS to a ceramic metal halide, leaving them without any incentive options. I think that's jumping a little ahead, and this is totally subjective. It's my opinion. But whereas, I mean, because I can, I look at the numbers and I'm seeing the results of people going from 1,000 watts to a 630 watt ceramic metal halide. That's a 37% reduction in getting the same yields. That's 37% a lot, but for utilities to, I mean, and frankly, an LED will reduce the same amount of wattage, but it's just a different technology. I'd prefer if utilities would include ceramic metal halides and others, plasma induction, to be fair, as well as an efficient option. And we're seeing, like I mentioned, most of California offering LEDs only. I think the utilities will say that they don't want to incent legacy technology, but I feel like it's going to have the effect of people just investing in the less expensive high pressure sodiums, and those lights are going to then exist on the grid for a long time.
Okay. Can the owner of the lights be different than the operator, i.e. the landlord pays for the lights and leases the facility to the grower? That's an interesting question. I like that.
Well, I don't know if that question is about leasing criteria or in general, but for rebate eligibility, yes, that is absolutely just fine to have a property management company or somebody else own the equipment, as long as it's installed in the building. And even though these are fixtures and they're kind of like appliances, you can unplug them and walk away with them. People don't do that. So the utility just wants to know that they're installed. So that won't affect rebate eligibility too much. As far as our leasing goes, yes and no. We are leasing based on these things being used in a cannabis application, or we have some non-cannabis clients, but not many. So we want to make sure that there's a business model that can support the lease payments. And sometimes when we looked at landlords applying, there's not enough economics there to support the payments. It's contingent so much on the lease lessee rental that it doesn't quite pencil out. So it's doable, but I'm not sure if the question was about leases or rebate eligibility.
Okay. You touched on this. You could go a little more in detail. How do utilities establish baseline loads for new grow ops? Do you see them vary in the veg and flowering rooms between the utilities? You kind of mentioning 16 square foot per light, etc. So how do they establish that baseline?
Yeah, great question. Baseline is a big term in the utility world. Since these are industrial, so we're talking lighting, but it's lighting as an industrial process. So it's not like standard lighting. And I'll say, standard lighting, let's say if you were lighting up a grocery store, there's an energy code that says for general purpose lighting, you can only install 2 watts per square foot, for example. But this is a process and it's not covered by energy code. So since we can technically, we're allowed to install as many watts as we can cram into a room. We need to propose our own baseline, and the industry standard is, and this is kind of subjective, and there's no report we can really point to. There's some decent reports you can point at, but they're not true baseline studies. But 1,000 watts per 16 square feet equals about 68 watts per square foot. So that's what I propose as the baseline to utilities. Or you can describe, that over a 4x8 rack, we have 3 8-lamp T5s, which is a little bit less than 68 watts per square foot, but not a whole lot less. So we would describe the exact fixture layout over the canopy space and propose what a reasonable baseline is, meaning what's commercially available, what are the costs of that equipment, and what's the energy usage of that equipment. And that's the baseline. And that's where some of the art comes into play, and utilities will negotiate it a little bit. It might be affected by what you're proposing as your efficient case. For example, if you're proposing that you're going to put one 315-watt ceramic metal halide over a 4x4, I've had some utilities say, well, that's fine, you can do that, but it doesn't quite pass the sniff test to go from 1,000 watts to 315. So we use a 600 watt as the baseline for this application. For your flowering rooms where you're going from 1,000 to 630, that makes sense. So it kind of has to pass the sniff test. And if it comes out that we're proposing an 80% reduction, they might just say, well, that just sounds like too much. Normally it's 40 to 60 or 65% reduction. So baseline, it's on our shoulders to propose to them a reasonable baseline, and we can point to pictures of. And I typically have a library full of pictures of grow rooms with 1,000 watts over each 4x4 area, each tray. And I say, look, this is industry standard practice, and utilities will accept it or negotiate that point. But it sure would be nice if we had a real utility grade, statistically significant sample of existing commercial grows to know what, if 68 watts per square foot is a true representation of industry standard or if it's something else. That's a long-winded way of saying it's all custom.
Good answer, though. Here's a question that's kind of an opinion. Maybe you have some facts around this. Is light-emitting ceramic technology really an efficient alternative to double-ended high-pressure sodiums?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, this is kind of like the earlier question. What's best? I think double enders are not that inefficient. I think at least light-emitting ceramics are a great alternative and more efficient than a single-ended high-pressure sodium or metal halide. But as far as if you're talking micromoles per joule, they're kind of in the same ballpark. I don't want to hash out which technology is best. I try to stick to what I know.
That's it. Okay, here's another one that's come in. As LED can allow for multiple tier grows and then the total exceeds HPS, as HPS was original 1 open floor, can these situations somehow get a rebate? That's a mouthful.
Yeah, that's a very good question. The short answer is yes. We have been successful at getting rebates on, let's just say, 4,000 square feet of canopy in a 1,000 square foot room because it has 4 racks. And again, in that case, that's where it's important to emphasize that the unit of measurement is the square feet of canopy, and if it's 4 tall, then you have 4 times the plant canopy in that footprint. So yes, we've absolutely been successful with that. We've had some utilities. We've had to debate that at length with some utilities, but in general, we've prevailed, and we have been able to get rebates on every tier on its own. And it's a funny question. It's kind of hints at another question about new construction versus retrofit, because since LEDs can enable us to go vertical, I mean, you could do that with fluorescents too, or I've seen it with HIDs even, but we are using more energy than we would otherwise. But if we change the base situation to saying, well, now that we have racking systems, for example, we can go 4 high. If we were to use legacy technology, even fluorescence might be a decent application for that, like T8s or T5s rather. We might use that as the baseline. We can, as long as you can. It's a circular reference, really. As long as we can show what we would have otherwise used with this 4 racking system, then that will be our baseline for that application.
Sure. Yeah, we're seeing our industry definitely evolve to the multi-tier racking growing. This is one of the things that we specialize in here at ACC. And yeah, you'll be helping us with a project soon around multi-tier system, and so I'm excited to see how that one lays out with the rebate side.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Another good thing to look at, I don't want to overgeneralize, but we're seeing a huge growth in sliding tables and even vertical sliding racks. And with those, we often end up wasting less light. Because we know light has an angle of trajectory down towards the plants, and a lot of it lands in the aisleways. But when you remove all the aisles, that's less waste. So sometimes we're able to show that in this room where we otherwise would have used 100 lights, we're only using 92, and that's thanks to these movable aisleways. But that can go into the rebate application as well, things like that. We have been successful in some cases in even counting some of the cost of those sliding tables. That's not really standard, but if we have an engineer on the utility side who's willing to talk to us, we've done some creative things to get some really nice rebates that help the growers out.
Great. Well, Bob, we've got about a couple minutes left here. I wanted to open the floor to you if you wanted to say a few last things here before we wrap this up. I'll kind of turn the floor over to you, and we can get close to wrapping this up here in a few minutes.
Sure. I'd say the message that I have to growers or anyone involved in building out a facility is that the rebate incentive funds are yours, and you're eligible to collect them. You do pay into via your rates, you are paying into energy efficiency funds. And don't be discouraged if you call the utility and they say they don't offer cannabis, they don't have a cannabis program, because we just need to reframe it as a custom commercial. But it's your money and you're eligible for it. There are some exceptions with some utilities that are a little too closely tied to the federal government, who simply just say, no, we can't help you out with that. And there's limits to how far we can push on that. But yeah, it's your money, and so go get it. It's real money. Like I say, $5 or $6 billion a year is already being spent on these rebates, and with this being the largest load, I don't know what percent of that I would expect to see going to cannabis, but I think a disproportionate amount should be going to the cannabis industry's pockets to help, reduce the need to build power plants and all that. And lastly, don't forget to get pre-approval first. That's the most important deal breaker in all of this, is don't buy your lights before you engage with the utility, and you'll know when they give you approval. It's a formal process, it's a contract, and it's well worth the upfront work.
Okay. Well, Bob, I want to thank you today for coming on and talking about energy rebates, the founder of Seinergy, and I want to thank our audience as well today for tuning in and listening, and the great engagement with our question and answers. We look forward to having you guys here again next month for our next webinar. Everyone have a great day and have a happy holiday. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Ellis, and thank you to the audience for all your questions.
Great. Take care.